Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today for our webinar, Understanding Global UDI Rules. My name is Stacy Ajum, and I'm the Marketing Manager here at Siegel Scientific. Just to let you know, all attendees are on mute, and this meeting is being recorded. If you feel uncomfortable, please log off at this time. And just to let you know, an email with access to the recording and additional resources will be sent to all registrants and attendees. And you can view more of our recordings and other broadcasts on our YouTube channel. Yeah, awesome. Okay. So our guest for today, or excuse me, our host for today, our webinar is being hosted by our Director of Marketing, Elizabeth Sinclair, and also by our Senior Sales Engineer, Ian Cummings. A little bit about Ian Cummings. He has over 27 years of experience in the auto ID industry with 19 years here at Siegel Scientific. He has extensive knowledge of barcodes, printers, and label media materials. He also studied computer science at college. So yeah, with that, I'm gonna pass it over to Elizabeth, and she's gonna start talking about UDI. Take it away.
Hi, everybody. I'm happy you've joined us today, mostly because I'm really proud of our company history with UDI and medical device manufacturing. BarTender's roster of UDI customers includes many of the world's largest medical device manufacturers, but also small manufacturers that make very specialized, unique equipment that saves lives every day. There's a lot of UDI expertise at Siegel Scientific. It predates my joining the company in 2013. We've been deeply involved with UDI policy and regulation through our work with industry groups like AIM, advising global regulatory bodies about technology and policy as UDI rules were established. We were in the room when the FDA announced the final UDI rule. We're especially passionate, though, about medical device manufacturers and helping them implement UDI. We've seen through our experience that companies that make the right investment in a well-planned UDI deployment can streamline their processes and their supply chain, gaining efficiencies that they hadn't actually expected. So there's a caveat here. Interpretations of UDI may differ not only from country to country, but there can also be disagreement about how the rules work among smart people who operate in the same country, sometimes even in the same company. While the goal all along has been to harmonize global UDI regulations, harmonization is different than standardization. There are going to be nuances in policy from regulatory agency to regulatory agency. I cannot encourage you enough to engage an experienced regulatory professional as you go forward if you want to enter new markets and seek compliance with differing regulatory bodies. So I think you're going to be surprised today at the differences in UDI between the EU, the US, and China. You're going to be surprised because there's hardly any difference. We're going to spend some time talking about why that's the case, exploring where UDI comes from. That's an important part of understanding global UDI rules. And it's especially important for those of you who operate across geographies, perhaps engaged in component manufacturing or importing, exporting. We're going to talk about what a UDI is, take a look at the primary differences in rules between China, the EU, and the US, and then look briefly at rules specific to China. Ian's then going to show us how to make a compliant UDI label, and we'll finish with a brief Q&A session. Please note, if we don't get to your question during the webinar, we'll respond personally within the next few days. So, UDI, as we know it today, started with a formalized effort to harmonize UDI globally in 1992, when the Global Harmonization Task Force was convened. GHTF was a partnership between the medical device industry, so manufacturers, and global regulatory authorities, so agencies like the US FDA, And it was set up to explore the issue from all angles, supporting technologies, manufacturing processes, differences in substrates that might need to be marked, and how that might be implemented while maintaining human safety. Um, the GHTF worked to achieve a greater understanding between industry and regulators and greater uniformity between national medical device regulatory systems in an increasingly global economy. Their goals were enhancing patient safety and increasing access to safe, effective, and clinically beneficial medical technologies around the world. Having a diverse set of regulations across the globe would hamper global commerce and in turn also hamper patient access to devices. It was really important to have a harmonized system. The GHTF's work was in an advisory capacity only. So, I mean, the good news here is that the industry had the opportunity to offer expertise, but no ability to create regulation, which is probably a good take on it. They then handed off their work in 2011 to the International Medical Device Regulators Forum. So the IMDRF is comprised solely of regulatory authorities. It's not an advisory organization. It actually has the teeth to create and enforce policy. It's managed by the US FDA, Health Canada, the European Commission Directorate General Health and Consumers, Japan's Pharma and Medical Devices Agency, Brazil's Anvisa, and Australia's Therapeutic Goods Administration. The WHO is the official observer. Regulatory agencies around the world have all based their UDI rules on the work of the IMDRF. That includes China, the EU, and the US. So what do the core elements defined by IMDRF look like? Remember, their goal was to create a harmonized system. So the elements include the UDI and UDI carrier. The data carrier is a 1 or 2D barcode, RFID tag, NFC, any auto ID data carrier. They're based on standards. A UDI applied to a medical device anywhere in the world should be able to be used globally and to meet the UDI requirements of its regulatory authority. National or local ID numbers should not be a substitute for UDI, right? If everybody's not speaking the same language, if there are nuances that are regional, then you're not creating an interoperable system that's going to enable human safety. The UDID, that's the unique device identifier, core elements should not be modified. There's a thing here about the HL7 product label and web-based interface for data submission. HL7 is just a language standard that's typically used to share healthcare information. It's worth noting that US FDA's final rule doesn't require HL7, but it offers it as an option for data submission. Every medical device needs to be identified by a UDI unless it's exempted, and we don't really have time to get into the minds of regulators and why a certain device might be exempted today. National or regional regulatory requirements shouldn't restrict methods of AIDC, as this will hinder the establishment of a globally harmonized UDI system. So not restricting AIDC makes the work of the IMDRF more durable, right? As advances in AIDC technology occur, medical device marking will be able to evolve with the technology. And we're going to talk a little bit about how trends in data carrier have evolved over the years since UDI was first put in place. So the tools of UDI are auto ID, barcodes or RFID, the printers that print or encode them, and the scanners that read them. Regulations require that the UDI appear in both machine readable and human readable on a label or mark. And as you work to develop your UDI marks, keep in mind that technology will be used in a variety of locations and circumstances. UDI is used in operating rooms, bedside at hospitals, even in homes. Some places RFID might be the perfect choice, but in a location for end use with less robust technological infrastructure, it's probably not the right choice. So consider which technology will be best for your application. Also, follow requirements. Some customers will specify a particular AIDC data carrier. For example, the US Department of Defense is the world's largest purchaser of medical devices. If you sell to them, maybe if they're one of your customers, maybe it would be a good idea to use their Symbology on all of your products. So about the evolution of UDI data carriers just in the last few years, originally most UDI was carried in 1D codes. But now technology for reading 2D codes exists everywhere, including in your pocket. Cameras and smartphones are 2D readers, right? So we're seeing a global shift away from 1D barcodes, which take up an awful lot of real estate to convey a smaller amount of data, and not just even in medical devices and UDI. So the interesting thing is, so we've had smartphones for quite a while, but they weren't viable readers in the early days because the smartphones and cameras had really limited battery life. But technology has advanced so that cell phones can go a very long time without charging. And so the use of 2D barcodes is growing. I mean, we hear stories, if you talk to floor nurses, that they would never carry a scanner around in their pocket. But now that there are 2D codes and they can scan them with an app on their smartphone, they're much more likely to use the technology. The other interesting thing about 2D barcodes is you can also add another layer. You can add color, which in essence adds another axis of information, which makes even smaller codes possible. And some medical devices are tiny. Remember that AIDC technology hasn't been specified in UD regulations to make sure that the rules are long-lasting and elastic. So for smaller medical devices that offer limited real estate for marking, using a 2D code with color might be appropriate. So no matter where it is that you're labeling, where in the world, everywhere in the world, a UDI is a character string rendered in both human and machine readable, containing identifying information in two parts. The DI, the device identifier, is the mandatory fixed portion of a UDI that identifies the labeler, meaning manufacturer, and the specific version or model of a device. The DI is acquired from an authorized issuing agency. So in the US, it might be a GS1 GTIN, it might be a HIBIC LIC. For tissue that functions as a medical device, it would be issued by ICCBA, and those are also issuing agencies for the EU. In China, it might come from GS1, but maybe also from the ZIIOT or Ali Health. Okay. The second part of the UDI is the production identifier, the PI. This will vary from device to device. Each individual item will have its own individual PI. The PI is the conditional variable portion of the UDI created by the manufacturer. It contains internal tracking information. So the lot or batch number within which a device was manufactured, maybe serial number, expiration date of a specific device, the date a device was manufactured. So this is interesting because what this leaves, it leaves this variable data responsible, at least the manufacturer responsible for managing this variable data. For the overall larger device, the regulatory body actually manages that data. That we're going to talk about how that data gets registered. But it's all about enabling recalls, right? So if the regulatory agency can identify a device that may be faulty and may need to be recalled, they can take care of that piece across industry, and then the individual player, the manufacturer, can can come in and identify exactly where that device went and who has it in their body or on their body. So um, if any of those items, any of the items like the serial number or expiration date appear anywhere on a label, independent of the UDI, they must also appear on the PI. And I think you can see here that, so this label, we've got lot number, manufactured, used by, all of these things all need to be included in the UDI. So it's also important that this information be accurate, that the data that appears in the UDI and elsewhere on the label be identical. And we've got good news for BarTender users there. Ian's going to show you how you can ensure that those marks come from the same data source using BarTender. But so how did China, the EU, and the US line up? So here's where we find differences. It's not in the UDI itself. It's not in the piece that BarTender does, but in how UDI is administered and tracked. The National Medical Products Administration is the governing body for UDI in China. In the EU, it's the European Commission, and in the US, it's FDA. As you'll remember from the previous slide, the DI is issued by an approved code agency. GS1 is globally accepted, although in China, you'll be getting your code from GS1 China, not your regional GS1 member organization. HIBIC, which is a standard widely used in Western healthcare settings, and ICCBA, we already discussed, it's a standard for identifying tissue, are accepted in the EU and the US. China's list of approved issuers includes, let's see if I can do this, Zhangguangcun Industry and Information Research Institute of Two-Dimensional Technology. That's a third-party service provider for the registration and certification of 2D codes across industries, not specific to medical devices. Although obviously the UDI, DI they issue are specific to medical devices, and Ali Health, which is a subsidiary of Alibaba. So we've talked about how a primary goal of UDI is to facilitate speedy product recalls to preserve human health. Recalls don't really work if a UDI program doesn't have a registration component. Somebody has to be keeping track of that information. And notice it's not the PI data, the item level production data that's registered. When the IMDRF was doing their work, keeping track of that much individual data was unthinkable. There wasn't the technological infrastructure to manage that quantity of data. A lot has changed in the past decade, and often I wonder if we're going to be reaching a time where the regulatory bodies will also require registration of the device identifiers, or the production identifiers. So it's only the device information, the static device data, the DI, that must be tracked and registered. Each regulating body has its own database for medical devices sold and used in its geography. In China, it's the UDI database, or UDID. In the EU, it's UDIMED, and in the US, it's the GoodID, or Global UDI database. So the manufacturer, as they commercialize an item, they upload that data to their regional database. But we live in a global economy, and a single device type might possibly be used just about any place in the world. And remember, IMDRF's goal was global harmonization, which increases patient safety and enables simplified global commerce. And so we have the Global Data Synchronization Network, the GDSN, a way for these data to be tracked across global data pools. The EU and the US subscribe to the GDSN, so their UDI data is readily accessible anywhere. A big deal has been made of China not sharing their data via the DSN, but they're presently building a connector on their own so that their data can be shared in the way they want it shared. So they're in the no column now, but expect them to begin sharing data with the GDSN soon. So doing business in China, how does that work? The NMPA has certain rules. I think the nuance here between the EU and the US and China is mostly that you're just dealing with different regional authorities. I think that the process for doing business in China is very similar to the process that you'd need to use in the US. It's substitute FDA or European Commission for NMPA, and I think you've got a good start. There are 5 things that they've set out, though. You have to select a Chinese issuing agency. Again, if you select a GS1 code, you have to, or GS1 data taxonomy and syntax, you have to get that from China GS1. You create a UDI based on that issuing agency's data syntax. And remember that the UDI is the string of the alphanumeric string that identifies the product. Then you select a data carrier. That's the 1D, 2D, RFID, NFC, the data carrier according to that issuing agency standards. You need to upload the DI and related data into the Chinese UDI database before commercializing a device. And then update the UDI database anytime any product or related information changes. So I'm just about ready to hand this over to our very bright friend, Ian, who knows more about BarTender than almost anybody in the world, maybe more than anybody in the world. But I hope I shed a little light on the mysteries of UDI today. I'm really enthusiastic about BarTender and UDI, well, because BarTender is a really great product, but also because it's thoughtfully built to meet the needs of medical device manufacturers. There are features that are specifically designed to help companies that do business around the world, including a translation and word bank feature. Interesting as you're going to market in China to know that BarTender supports every modern writing system. BarTender's intelligent templates enable global change management in an instant. Simple database change and global labeling lines are updated immediately. And I know change management is very important to the medical device industry. And also, we work very closely with GS1. GS1 compliance is built in, which is important for medical device manufacturers who choose GS1 as their issuing agency. It is almost impossible to build a non-compliant GS1 code with a BarTender, although I would imagine that Ian might contest that assertion because he's seen everything. But before I get carried away, let's hear from Senior Sales Engineer Ian Cummings, who's going to show us just how easy it is to set up a UDI label in BarTender to manage complex data. Ian, take it away.
Thanks, Elizabeth. I'll try my best. Let's make myself the presenter and show the correct screen, hopefully. This one. Elizabeth, if you could tell me if you can see my screen okay?
I do see your screen.
Excellent. You see the BarTender?
I do.
Excellent. Okay, so as we can see, I'm running BarTender 2021, which is the latest version of BarTender, and R4 in particular, which is the latest service release. Before I start designing a label, I just want to bring to your attention the fact that we actually have some example labels in the sample folder of BarTender. When you install the software, we already have some example UDI style labels following both the GS1 and HIBIC standards. So depending on what you want to do, which standard you want to follow, which type of barcode, whether it's the 1D or the 2D barcode you wish to use, we have some samples which you can take and modify for your own particular requirements. However, today, what I will do is create one from scratch, more or less. Okay, so from a new document, I'll first adjust my page setup so it's roughly of a 4-inch square size. Please excuse my use of metric here for any of our cousins in America. 6, basically 4 inches. Okay. From our label side, before I start designing the document with label objects, I first want to connect to data. And this is because document design is very data intensive, and therefore it makes sense to have the data available first, so that as you add content to the label design, you're doing so with that data fields already available to you. Now for this example, I'm going to use an XML data file or XML data. The concept is that when printing these labels, we will typically be printing as a consequence of a request coming from a business system, such as an ERP or an MES system. Often these systems will make use of web services, which we will demonstrate. And in this case, we're using XML as the payload data. Now I can connect to a sample or dummy data file, or I can just simply copy and paste into a text box here. So what I'll do is I'll just switch over to this text editor. Here we can see some XML. I'll just do a Control A, Control C to copy, and come back to BarTender and paste that in. So I'm using sample data so that as I design the document, I can then make use and see that data on screen. If we quickly look at the XML, it's basically a request for printing. We have some metadata items here, which includes the name of the document I wish to print, the printer I wish to print to, but also some label data, so information about the manufacturer, including, as you'll see here, a company logo, where the data is actually base64 encoded image data. And likewise for the product, we have some product details that identify what that product is, including a picture of the product, which is also being provided in a variable way via the request. So I go through the wizard to connect to this particular format of XML. The wizard will note that it's essentially returning one record of data. And from that, I can choose which nodes of the data that I wish to use. And I'll just select all of them. Finish. From here, we can see that we have a XML data connection with the fields. Some of these fields are identified with a certain data type, and I can change those to be text if it makes things easier for myself, for example. Click on OK, and we can see our data fields now are shown on the left in our toolbox. I can start adding content to my document design now. So for example, I'll take the company name and place that on my label. Choose a font that I particularly like, perhaps. This one here will be good enough. Change the size, and like so. If I open the properties of this particular object, we can see that it's a text object and it's connecting to a particular data field for its data source. Let's add some more content. So the product name, for example, make this of a smaller size, and also I'll make this a paragraph text object, like so. Because what I can do, press the Enter key there to take me to the next line, and for here I will drag and drop the description, next line, and then the dimension, like so. And I can make some of these items smaller in size, this one as well, like so, and I can change the formatting as well. So give me a rich text formatting. Let's add the picture. So let's put a box there, more or less. And into this, I can add a picture object. Now for this, I'll choose, rather than simply embedding a picture from file, I'll include an encoded picture data picture object. And this is essentially where the data for the picture is coming from a data source. So for the data source, I'll switch from embedded data and select database field instead. Oops, did I? Of course, it helps if I select the correct database field. Product image, thank you. I'll just scale that to the dimension that I wish to use in the label. Now, there are then a number of data items that are represented with icons and text, and it's put into a kind of a grid type structure. So for this purpose, I'm going to use the grid object where I can insert a grid onto the label design. And the purpose of this is to give structure to the label design, like so that the items are not just placed in a very floating sort of way, but are aligned in a nicely regulated grid structure. So if I add first one of the symbols, we can make use of BarTender's symbol font feature, where we have various symbol fonts available to us. I'll select the medical devices symbol font. And for this one, I'll choose the lot item, like so. Put that down. Let's change its size to, what is it, 16? And I'll just drag and drop that into one of the cells of the grid. Likewise, I can take the lot field, which is a product item, like so. Let's change the size of that. I think it needs to be like 6 or something, quite small, and put that in like so. And we can do this in a step-by-step process. But a way of cheating is to make use of the components feature of BarTender. So for example, if I take this lot symbol and choose to create a component, I could call it lot, for example. So it allows me to drag and drop and essentially reuse that component in my document design. As a time saver for the demo, of course, I've done these earlier, so I can drag and drop these items directly onto the label into the appropriate grid space, like so. Single use, as denoted by the number 2 being crossed out, damaged product, the upper temperature limit. And you'll notice this really helps if you're needing to create multiple documents and you don't want to be reinventing the wheel. You don't want to be doing the same thing time and time again. I've also done this for the words. So this helps me out a lot to just simply drag and drop content into the design. Damaged package. So, of course, I'll need to resize some of this in just a second. Manufactured on. Used by. And then lastly, the serial number. So even if it's quite a complex object, we can quite quickly and rapidly modify things so that it looks good. Let's open the properties of the grid object. And what I'm going to do is change the cell alignment of this particular object so that the lot symbol and the lot value are close next to each other. Same with this single use, like so. This one here, top right. Now, of course, I can ultimately cheat and just drag and drop onto my label a grid that I did earlier, which is all nicely formatted. Like so, just because we're a bit short on time. So I place that into the correct spot. Now, barcodes. Let's take a look at barcodes. So for the example we'll do today, we're going to make use of the GS1 barcodes. So let's start off with a GS128. Now I can add it from the pull-down list like so, or I can access the More Barcodes dialog in order to have access to the full set of barcode symbologies. Of course, only some of them are suitable for use with your UDI label. Open up the properties of the barcode. Come on, computer. And select Symbology. From the Symbology, we can see that GS1 data matrix is currently selected. We can choose other options that change the dimensions, etc. But here, in particular, is the GS1 application identifier wizard. And this steps us through the process of creating a GS1 barcode. So let's bring this into the center. Okay, so for our GS1, we first need to select GTIN, the globally traded item number, as this identifies both the product and I also guess the manufacturer. And we'll choose the database field as the type. And of course, we then need to choose the barcode field in particular, or the database field in particular. Here we select the GTIN. Yes, I'd like to append an additional application identifier. Next is the production date, so when the product was made. Select next, next. Now by default, it gives us the option of using the system clock, but because UDI is very tightly controlled typically by the business system, in this case, we'll select the database field because the system will be sending us all of these details, sending BarTender all of these details for use in the print shop. So we choose the manufactured on field, and it's in the format of year, month, and day. Yes to some more. Next is the expiration date. And again, choose the database field. Oops. Choose the appropriate field. Used by, I think it is. Yes to some more. The lot, the batch number, so a particular production run. Choose next, database field. And of course we choose lot number. Next, one last one. And this of course is vital for the UDI, is to individually identify an individual instance of a product that's been made in production. So therefore, a unique serial number. Of course, altogether, the barcode that we're generating here is, in fact, the UDI, but the serial number introduces one additional element of uniqueness to the overall code. So let's choose the serial number. No more, and finish. So this results in our barcode. And of course, we can choose to format that in different ways. By default, human readable is down there at the bottom. And that may not be the nicest way of representing that. So we can click on this yellow handle, drag this to the side. And for the human readable, I can then choose to break up the line of text for each application identifier. So this then gives us a very readable list of items. Also, I believe if you look at the specification of GS1, they also often say that we should be using a very readable monospaced font such as OCRB that really does highlight the particular text, makes it very readable to humans. So put that into position. I think we're running short on time, so I'll do some cheating and drag and drop some additional items such as the company logo and the contact details, like so. Finish your design, and of course we can then print or preview. At the moment, of course, it's linked to the static data of course, it's wanting to format some particular data there. It's using the static data of what we set up in the database connection, but there we can see that the label has printed with the information clearly displayed and easily and nicely formatted. Now, just by way of cheating, I did actually create this label earlier, but this one is a bit more advanced. So with this label design, if I switch to the layers section, you'll see that we actually have 3 separate layers. So one layer which is of the product, so that makes it more easy to see what I mean there. A section for the label where we're using a code 128 or GS1 128 barcode. And alternatively, one with the data matrix. One with the data matrix instead. And you'll notice that each of these are conditional. So if I open up the condition of the layer, select the properties, we can see that when this particular field, barcode type, equals 2D, then I want to print this particular layer. And conversely, of course, for this one, when that particular field equals 1D, we print the other instead. So based on the data that is provided at print time, and you can see barcode type here, essentially metadata, that decides how this document will print in the formatting, not just the variable data. Do you want the one-dimensional barcode or the two-dimensional barcode? Now, of course, earlier I mentioned that when it actually comes to print time, customers will want to do this in an integrated way that integrates with their business system. To this extent, I've built an integration using BarTender's integration platform that comes with the automation and enterprise editions. So here I've built an integration called medical product label, and this one is based on web services. And the service name is medical_product, which is what you will see as part of the URL, the endpoint on which the web service is available. In terms of the input data, of course, we're bringing in XML data. And as a response, going back to the business system, we will typically send back a BarTender's XML response. But as we'll see in just a moment, we can actually customize that if we wish. Coming to the actions, so what we want to do in response to the request from the business system, we're running these actions sequentially, and we have two main actions here. First, to get some metadata items from the XML, and then second, to print the label. In terms of getting metadata items, what I'm simply doing here is running what's called an XSL transform to extract one data item from the incoming XML and to output that to what we call an integration variable. So here I'm extracting the request ID, I'm getting the name of the document, the name of the printer that I wish to use from the XML, and also I'm extracting the unique serial number. These are then used in the actions that we then perform. So first, I have a static link to a folder, and then I'm using the document integration variable to specify precisely which document design I wish to print. Next, again, we're using the printer integration variable, and you can tell it's a variable because it's surrounded by the percentage marks. So that is also set dynamically. Number of labels to print, just one. And here, importantly, database overrides. It allows us to override the XML data connection with the variable data that we have just detected, the event data that was sent to us by the business system. Because of course, we do not want to print the dummy data that we used at design time. Instead, we want to print the transactional data at time of print request from the business system. When we're happy with the integration, we can come to test and we can start the integration from within the builder application to test that everything is working. Once we've done that, we can then come to deploy the integration to the server. Now I've gone ahead and already deployed this integration to my laptop in this occasion. So if I come to the administration console, select integrations, we can see that I have my medical product label integration deployed and waiting for events. Now, of course, I don't have a business system to hand, but what I will do instead is make use of what's called a REST client, where we can specify the URL address that we want to send the message to, and also, in this case, the XML payload data. So here we have manufacturer information, the company logo as base64 image data, and then the product specific information. This one's a medical piston device, along with a picture of that product. And at the end, some additional data items. If I send that and look at my integration item here, of course, something's not working, of course. Oh, it did decide to work. Okay. Here we can see we got back a response. Now, actually, this is the customized response. Maybe I should have shown you the default response as we would normally see would be something such as this. So this is the default response of BarTender. It's called BarTender XML response. So this gives metadata information about the print job, letting the business system know that the label printed correctly. But as I said, we can actually customize this. So if we come to the response, and what I did to customize this was to, instead of choosing variable, I choose embedded template. And in my embedded template, I wrote out some XML and inserted some integration variables in there, some of which are system variables and some of which are from my integration. So this allows us to really customize the information that is sent back to the business system, including a confirmation of the serial number. I guess I should have had the full UDI code there as opposed to just the serial number, but it gives you the concept that we can, in response to the request, we can then send back that information. And that's fully customizable. Let's send the second request, because in the second request, it's got, of course, different data and different pictures. I guess things are going slow because I'm in a webinar and stuff. But we can see there the response is all looking good. Some of the data may have been clipped in the document design. And lastly, in History Explorer, which is allowing us to view from a traceability perspective the labels that were printed. First label we can see here is using the data matrix layout. It's using the company De Lillis for an ultra implantable medical piston. This one again, oops. Oh, sorry, I was on the wrong records. That was the first one. And this is the second, which is a different company, a different product. Same with the image, same with the company logo, and of course the layout of the code 128 GS1 barcode instead. And this is all from the same single document in BarTender, because BarTender is a very dynamic document creation application, very easy to use, very quick and simple in many ways, but also very powerful. So we can handle both variable data in different forms and formats, but also we can have dynamically formatted content as well. Elizabeth, back to you.
Thanks, Ian. And one of the things that I'd like to point out about the History Explorer that Ian just showed us, that's your complete audit trail as required by 21 CFR Part 11. BarTender manages all of those compliance issues for you. Again, I'm sold on the product. I'm pretty enthusiastic about it. A couple things to remember. Again, if Stacy's going to read off some of the questions that we've received this morning. If we don't get to your question this morning, we'll respond to you within the week with a bespoke and personalized answer. And then after the webinar, we'll not only be sending you out a link to the recording and the slide deck, but we'll also be sending out Ian's sample label so you can open it up in BarTender and play with it yourself. So with that, Stacy, do we have any questions?
Awesome.
Stacey?
Yes, we do have a few questions. Sorry about that. So the first question we have is, do these labels have to be in Chinese?
Oh, for selling into the China market. Okay, so I think there is a more practical consideration beyond just UDI with making sure these labels are in simplified Chinese, and that is they're never going to clear customs unless the labeling is in simplified Chinese. So yes, they do need to be in Chinese. And the good news there is, again, BarTender has a language phrase bank feature, so that any phrases you can make them a component, as Ian just demonstrated. And also, BarTender has support for every modern writing system. So any characters besides Latin, Hebrew, Greek, Thai, simplified Chinese, it's all in the product. It doesn't involve, you wouldn't have to put any specific images. You wouldn't have to tinker with it. It's just all there in BarTender. So.
Awesome. Another question we have is, when do these rules take effect?
They took effect in January of this year. So where a lot of countries and companies are playing catch up. For China, the UDI regulations came into force in January. Of course, UDI in the US, I think the first compliance date was 2014, but UDI is fully implemented already in the UDI, or in the UDI, in the US and in the EU.
Awesome. And we have time for just this one last question. But again, as Elizabeth said, if you submitted a question, we'll get back to you personally. But the last question we have time for is, where would I find the symbology needed for the labels in BarTender? Are there sample templates or labels that I could use?
Okay, so when you when you first install BarTender, we as part of the installation, we add, and I guess I've changed this particular folder myself, but essentially the default BarTender folder for BarTender will take you to a range of sample documents, and there'll be one there for HIBIC, at least as we have at the moment, but also in there should be some GS1 examples of medical device labels. So as you see, you can select those. If you're creating a barcode from scratch, go to the barcode from the toolbar, select more barcodes, and we can actually, from the left-hand side here, we actually do categorize different barcode symbologies for you, whether it's the healthcare and the HIBIC ones, or the GS1 versions thereof. I may be going to the wrong spots here. But yes, certainly you'll be able to find what you're looking for. And if you're not sure by categorization, you can just list out the entire list of them. For GS1, we do prefix GS1 examples of the symbology, so you'll find them all conveniently grouped together, like so.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Ian and Elizabeth. I really do appreciate it. And thank you so much, everyone, for attending. Unfortunately, we're out of time. But again, if you haven't done so already, please go ahead and submit your questions, and we'll follow up with you personally via email. And also, we'll be sending out access to the recording along with other resources that you'll find helpful. Again, thank you so much for joining us today, and take care.